Welcome to the Liberty Portal podcast by libertyportal.com, your gateway to a free society. On this show, we examine current events through a libertarian lens, seeking truth, cracking jokes, and providing you with better arguments to advocate for a freer world. The show is hosted by David Rand, political strategist and philosophy nerd widely known as the devil of Montana politics. Henri, Liberty Portal founder and editor, entrepreneur, and fitness enthusiast. And myself, Joe Sheehan, filmmaker and Liberty Portal producer. Philosophy nerd, is that right?
Philosophy nerd, yeah, I like it.
What does that mean?
Well, I take philosophy way too seriously. That's what it is. Yeah, I think that would be it.
Seems like something a philosopher would do.
Exactly. My love of wisdom is great. How about that?
That's perfect. Worth noting that you are the state director of Americans for Prosperity Montana, and you are off the clock, and your opinions expressed here are yours alone and not those necessarily of your employer. Is that correct?
Thank you for that disclaimer. Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome. Also joined by Henri Pellerin. Henri here is 92% perfect, according to several anecdotes maybe we'll be lucky enough to hear. He is the Liberty Portal founder and editor, and I am your humble moderator and producer. Certainly the dumbest guy in the room by a long shot. So,
but most artistic. I mean, definitely he's got the artistic IQ at the stratosphere.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
You can see color, for example. You got that one over me.
Oh, really? Are you colorblind?
I'm so colorblind. Yeah. Yep.
Fascinating.
Yep.
Well, maybe there's an inverse correlation between colorblindness and intelligence.
Or autism. Sorry.
Yeah, I certainly think I have the autistic.
Well, we're libertarians, so that goes without saying, right?
Touch of the tism at the table, perhaps.
Touch of the tism. That's the name. That's the name of the podcast right there.
Oh wow, that's
Touch of the tism.
Speaking of names that it wouldn't be very politically correct or marketable. Okay, well let's dig right in. So first show, we're obviously getting into things here. We've got a new year upon us. It's very newly 2023, and a heck of a year in news and politics behind us. Let's chat about some of the things that happened. I think we've got Ukraine on the brain a little bit right now. David, do you want to kind of lay the groundwork for why you think this was, one of the major events in 2022?
Oh man, why is Ukraine such a big deal? I think at least a big part of this is it is one of the best demonstrations of what I call a time slice bias, right? A lot of people are not interested in global politics, right? They're not interested in foreign policy. They're not looking at foreign policy as a question of the 100-year history that foreign policy actually happens at. It happens at a different time scale, right? I'll give you an example that isn't Ukraine, so we kind of de-emotionalize it real quick. You look at the rise of ISIS a couple years ago. That is a direct response to something that happened in 1913.
Wow.
Right.
And what was that?
That's the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and basically how after World War I, we broke up the Ottoman Empire into the nation states that now make up the Middle East. Much of Middle East politics all come from that one decision. Sykes-Picot is a very specific historical thing that happened between two different diplomats. That's not important. The important thing is just what happened after that. Set these lines and these rules that now govern how Middle Eastern politics work. Everything from Gulf War World War I to Gulf World War II, Gulf War II. Each one of those are examples of the bounds that we currently have when we broke up the Ottoman Empire. So equally, so if you just start off as like, wow, where did ISIS come from? Well, this year it was, wow, where did Russia come from? Why are they invading Ukraine? Isn't that crazy? That never happens. Countries don't invade one another. And that's true. It's very rare in the last 200 years that we've really seen a lot of countries just directly invading one another. 100 years, not 200 years. The story to that starts before then. And the best person to obviously look at this in the liberty movement is definitely Scott Horton. So go to him for your real foreign policy opinions. But what happens is a lot of things happen below the surface on foreign policy in the intelligence state. And what the intelligence state has been doing, is what it appears to be doing, is systematically putting pressure on Russia through bottom-up revolutions in countries that border Russia for a long time, while trying to cultivate in the more visible sphere an expansion of NATO to its borders. So consistently Russia said, hey, stop doing this. Hey, stop doing this. Hey, we know this is you. We actually got caught in 2014, I believe. No, that's not right. 2016, with diplomatic cables being released, basically a hacked phone call where we were picking the new government of Ukraine, which became, this government of Ukraine. That entire story, got released to the press and out and was debated. And with that, each one of these kind of straw breaking the camel's back become the invasion of Ukraine by Russia this year. And so for a lot of people, this was the first time they'd heard of this. But if anyone who was walking around in foreign policy circles knew that this was a point of contention for some time, everything from Kazakhstan, right, had a revolution really recent. Belarus had pressure from a bottom-up revolution recently. And then Ukraine, of course, we have the Donbass and the story there. That's been happening for 3 or 4 years now. There were peace accords in Spain, right, specifically saying that there's a humanitarian crisis in the Donbass. And yet we've all forgotten about that because Russia invaded Ukraine. So it kind of went down the memory hole, and now that's become the major story. And that's true. We have to react to that. And that is a terrible evil, right? No doubt. But it's an important component of, I think, 2020, what we're going to remember for 2022. And it's what's going to be, it's such a major story.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Zesty Beverages. They're on a mission to unf*** the standard American diet by crafting drinks with fewer calories and more nutrients from real food. Their lineup of delicious offerings now includes Electric Peak Yerba Mate, postbiotic sodas, keto-friendly, ready-to-drink margaritas, and hard teas. Wondering what a postbiotic soda is? Well, head on over to zestybev.com to learn more and find a retailer near you. Once again, check them out online at zestybev.com. That's zestybev.com.
Like you said, it's not really a story of, good versus evil. It's kind of, everybody's, bad on all sides of this equation. And it really blows my mind, even still, just the way that, prior to Russia invading Ukraine, your average person on the street could not have identified Ukraine on a map. And within 24 hours, they were so effectively mobilized to, put up flags and, change their social media posts and have very deeply held opinions that if you don't agree with this war, then you are an evil person. That happens so quickly.
What I get about the intuition is that if you haven't seen anything about this, all of a sudden you see a country defending itself from an aggressor country. I get that. I mean, libertarians, we believe in the non-aggression principle. So it's easy for us to say, well, that's a violation of the aggression. And it is, right? It is an escalation. It's problematic from many different points of view where we can condemn Russia and say, Russia, bad place. Putin, bad person, right? But justice is a larger question than just the nap. It includes things like, if you see a great example, this is actually Murray Rothbard's example. You see a guy who's running down the street with a purse, and you run and you tackle him, and you're like, give me that purse, and you take it from him, and you find an old lady who doesn't have a purse, and you hand it to her, right? That seems like justice, right? Until you know that guy had already just done exactly that to an actual purse thief and was trying to return the purse, right? The slice of time gives you important information about justice. The facts give you important information about
context
justice.
Matters.
Right, and if the U.S. State Department never takes any responsibility for the provocation of Russia in this situation, we have failed justice. We have failed the test.
Yeah.
I find it so interesting, too, that there are so many reasons not to support Ukraine. I mean, I think their defense of their borders is one reason to definitely support them because, as you said, non-aggression principle, they've got an aggressor state, they're dealing with it. But are they not one of the most corrupt countries in the world by some
absolutely.
measure? Yeah. I mean, Zelensky, while kind of looking like this really, resolute, altruistic leader, and I think in a lot of ways is being that for his country, has also just clamped down significantly on media freedom and has clamped down on religious freedom as well. So we're seeing him kind of execute a lot of these authoritarian measures under the guise of this emergency. So it's another one of those instances where it's like, well, hold on, we need to actually clear away some of the fog of war to an extent. Some of the fervor just around, we have to support Ukraine because they're being invaded, to understand like there are actually bad things that are coming out from the Ukrainian side as well.
Mm-hmm. There's a whole bunch of those things, and you can point at those and poke at those questions. Like one of the best ones is before the war, the banning of the Russian language in Ukraine. What does that mean if you're an ethnic Russian? That's a huge problem. That's a big deal. We would say that that's the worst kind of nationalism, right? So is this guy a good guy or a bad guy? That's an uninteresting question. The ultimate question is what role does U.S. foreign policy play in this? Should we be giving them more money than we gave our own war efforts in Afghanistan? Think about that. We're cutting larger checks in a shorter period of time for another country's military than we cut for our own military in trying to win the war in Afghanistan over 20 years.
And I think it has to be said as well, as soon as we get out of Afghanistan, there's this new war for us to get into. The military industrial complex is just thirsty for blood, and all the money that's being made by, politicians and the people who make the bombs and the weapons, at the expense of the young men who are fighting on both sides. That's never a part of the story. And it's probably the most important part of the story.
It's perhaps the wizard behind the curtain, right?
Right.
Yeah. Right. And to resist the idea of appearing too conspiratorial, the military industrial complex isn't like, it's not, I love how the deep state has become like a word that people actually understand now, because that's been in libertarian circles for a long time before it went mainstream. And the military industrial complex is mainstream, but for some reason there's a group of people who want to make it into a conspiracy theory. To be clear, listener, this is the most substantial theory that you could have when it comes to the influence of defense contractors on Washington, D.C. There's no doubt about that. This is the most solid, case of corporatism that you could have. Now, it's the kind of corporatism that is justifiable constitutionally, right? Unlike a lot of other corporatism, but it's still, it is a perverse incentive for Congress and for our politics, for sure.
So you could say that there's a touch of the tism in D.C. as well. Corporatism.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. This is so it has such wide use cases, right? The touch of the tisms.
It could
We're
work.
We're going to talk about all the tisms.
It could work.
Libertarianism.
Maybe we'll have to outsource the naming of the show. Not sure we can do it. All right, let's move on to the next thing. So for item number 2, David, do you want to get us started on Trump, FTX, or the results of the 2022 midterm elections?
Oh, man. Okay, so the political scientist in me wants to talk about the big story, right? Which is the red wave that didn't happen, right? So I think a couple of the things that people tend to miss is there are exceptions to the general rule that money wins elections, right? Trump is a good example. He got outspent substantially. But in general, what wins elections is incumbency and money. And what we saw this last election cycle, I think across the House and the Senate, the one common variable is that there was substantially less money on the right than everyone anticipated.
Why was that?
There's a couple explanations. There's the easiest explanation, which is that the Trump organization, the post-President Trump 501c4, C3, super PAC, atmosphere, organization,
the machine. Just call it the machine.
Thing. I can't remember exactly.
The cathedral?
The Trump, the Trump cathedral, the Trump mechanism machine ate up a lot of resources and then didn't spend it. So they're sitting on tons of hundreds of millions of dollars of donor funds that would normally go to Republicans that did not go to Republicans this year.
Fascinating. So Trump sort of pulled the water out of the pool for all the rest of the candidates.
Yes, in saying that these would go to these candidates, right? And there's been some great examples. Herschel Walker is one of the best ones, where 80% of the funds that went to the Trump organization did not get spent in that race.
No way.
Yes. So the Trump administration was part of it. The second is Mitch McConnell and crew, with the kind of more moderate Republican Senate leadership stuff, did not spend very wisely and spent inefficiently, according to some people. And there was a substantial effort by the right to make this red wave happen. But ultimately, if you don't have dollars, you can't get your word out, and you can't talk, and you're not heard nor understood. You're not going to get voted for.
True enough. So that's sort of your thesis on why the red wave didn't happen.
Yeah, that's I think the major predictor, right? The other headwinds and tailwinds that I think are real, especially for libertarians to look at and think critically about, is right now people don't understand why inflation's happening. If we don't control that narrative or own that narrative because we have the truth on our side,
right.
If we don't have that, we won't win. The reason why stagflation in the 1970s was solved with the Volcker Fed was because Milton Friedman built the intellectual basis for why the quantity of money theory and why the increase in the money supply was creating the inflation through artificially low interest rates, and why we need a larger interest rates to suck up that liquidity and end stagflation, which created a short-term crisis and then a boom throughout the 1980s and 90s. So right now that whole lesson's gone. Like, libertarians know it because we watch Free to Choose and we're nerds and we're weird. No one else knows this. So until we associate government deficit spending and policies of the Fed with inflation, we'll continue to lose, even as inflation's the number one issue people care about.
So 2 things. One, I think I for sure need a nerd button to set off an alarm when you go into libertarian jargon town, because there's a lot in there.
Stop me, please.
2, I think we need to do maybe a whole episode on the root causes of inflation and explaining it in a way, no offense, that regular people can understand.
Yep.
Like me, as the dumbest guy in the room.
Yeah, there's also, I think, a misunderstanding about what inflation is. Most people experience inflation as an increase in prices when, I guess the Austrian economic explanation of what inflation would be is an increase in the money supply, and the change in prices is an effect of inflation. But prices can change for many reasons. And I think this was the year where people started to care about this never-ending increasing money supply that's been going on for decades and decades, and even through the Volcker years and all that. And because they're finally going to the grocery store and they're seeing, a box of cereal costs $7, or my milk costs $10 or whatever it is, and gasoline, it just keeps going up and up and up. And those like Biden, I did that stickers, people are they're waking up to it. And yeah, I don't know how to like put a bow on that, but it's a moment in time right now where I think people might be willing to listen to libertarians, because we've been the ones who have cared about this for a long time.
Yeah, now's our opportunity. We've got a ready audience of people who now have a real tangible impact of inflation on their lives. And we have an opportunity to use this moment in time to explain why that's happening and hopefully bring people around to the ideas of what we can do to change it.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think that's a great summary of those important issues. We've got one more item from the last year, and we're saving the best for last year as libertarians. I think we should talk about the Libertarian Party and the rise of the Mises Caucus.
I think you should talk about this. You know more than I do.
Yeah, take it away.
Well, I certainly don't know all the nitty gritty, like inside baseball on this subject, but I do think this is, of all these stories, including, inflation, the war in Ukraine, this might be the most significant thing that happened last year. So the Libertarian Party is the third largest party in America. It used to be, for a long time, guys like us would not want to join the Libertarian Party. We would always distinguish between big L and small L, because the Libertarian Party had just become another political party. It was just, these so-called Beltway libertarians who don't really care so much about making change in the world. They have their position, and they want to keep their position in their party, and they're happy with that. Well, after decades of that not working, the Michael Heiss and Dave Smith and these really great libertarians formed a movement. And it's the continuation of the Ron Paul revolution that was the introduction for guys like us back in 2008, 2009, and brought us into the movement and exposed us to the Mises Institute, and got us reading all these classical texts, and inspired people like me to go get an economics degree. And that momentum kind of faded after Ron Paul left office. And I think after 10 years of everybody waiting around for another savior to come along and do the heavy lifting, we finally realized, the adults don't know what they're doing, and nobody's coming to help. And, we got to step into this and do it ourselves. So finally, for once, like the Libertarian Party actually represents libertarians. And that's really important. That's something that, I can get behind, and you guys can get behind, and hopefully the people listening to this can go right now and sign up, become a member of the Mises Caucus, or if you don't know about it, find out about it, because this is an important movement. And being the third largest party in America is no small thing. And it's not anywhere written in stone that we have to have this uniparty system forever and ever and ever. I mean, the Republicans were at one time a radical third party that had this crazy idea to end slavery. And, we're this radical third party that has a crazy idea to end all kinds of violations of the non-aggression principle. And I think we have the truth on our side, and we have the better ideas, and now we have the young energy. We have this momentum going for us, and especially as we enter into this new political cycle where, you know, in 2024, who knows who's going to actually be running, but you know, the rumor is that Dave Smith is going to be the candidate for the Libertarians. And I mean, Dave Smith is basically, you know, a combination of Ron Paul and Joe Rogan. I mean, he's a guy that can,
that's a great way to qualify.
He's a guy that can actually articulate the message. He can excite people and gather some momentum around him. And he might be going up against a very split field. I don't know if it's going to be Biden or not, but who is not embarrassed to be a Democrat at this point? I mean, they don't really have any, you know, substance to vote for. They have a lot of emotional reasons, a lot of cultish tribal reasons to vote for Democrats, but if it's going to be Biden versus potentially a very divided Republican Party, Trump might run as an independent. Kanye West is probably going to run, and you guys laugh, but like he's got his supporters too. And if it's sufficiently,
that's why I'm laughing. I'm sort of terrified maybe of that.
Sure.
Eventuality.
I mean, but if it's sufficiently split enough, like you might only need 30% of the vote to win, you know? And, who was, the guy I'm blanking on, you'll remind me, the guy that ran as a third party in the 90s. Ross Perot. Thank you. He got 18% of the vote in 92.
Right. No, right? He is a self-funder and spent hundreds of millions of dollars of his own money, which Dave Smith does not have. But I get what you're saying. And that's in a split year, who knows?
Well, Joe Rogan does, and they're pretty good buddies.
Yeah, so. Just might cut a big check. Well, that's a little different self-funding versus getting it from your buddies.
That's true.
Still, I have some thoughts here, and to yes and into that. So one thing, as far as I think the difference between Beltway and outside Beltway libertarians isn't that Beltway libertarians are not interested in change. I think what they're interested in, more so than folks who are more in the states outside of DC and outside of the media, is they're more interested in looking good representation of their ideas. They want to be seen as a legitimate form of a legitimate form of the discourse, which I totally understand. There's a value there that everyone's actually shooting for. If the Mises Institute could be taken more seriously, they would take the thing that would allow them to be taken more seriously. That said, being a minority means you are outside the norm, right? We have a lot of ideas that a lot of people do not understand, right? So there's a tension there between people who prioritize first looking good and second the ideas, and people who prioritize first the ideas and second looking good. And thankfully we have Joe, so he can make us look good. And we got all ideas that you can articulate so that we can kind of come to that place where we're trying to split that mean of persuading people into our camp. Because that's what we ultimately both of, right? We both to be a part of the acceptable range of discourse and to bring more people in. And we have to have the ideas that compel people, that excite people, that get people, you know, desiring to use their time, resources, and effort to advance alongside of us.
Totally. Yeah, you know, I actually, just working off of that, David, I recall the energy that I felt when I first kind of got talked out of my sort of maybe mainstream conservative Republican views that I kind of inherited from my parents and became truly my own political entity in terms of the way that I felt that, you know, the ideals and visions that I had, and became a libertarian. And it was all around the Ron Paul movement. I mean, it was so captivating and so easy to be a part of. And the interesting thing about the Mises Caucus right now is that it's the first time since then that I've actually felt like that energy is back. And I think that has the potential not only to pull people like disaffected Democrats, disaffected Republicans, folks who are tired of Trump or just can't imagine voting for Biden for a second term, into a camp of people who are also, you know, disenchanted with the current political environment that we have, this gridlock in Washington, or just these like wacko policies or foreign wars or incredible inflation, and bring them into a new place that can inspire them like it inspired me 10 years ago.
What I would like to see, especially in the LP, is I love what the Mises Caucus is doing in terms of trying to put forward a more foreign policy focused LP, a more monetary policy focused LP. That is awesome, and I love it. I don't know if their Twitter game is making things worse or better.
Yeah,
right?
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, that's a question. I think memes are great, but I don't know if it's great for coming from a major party. Maybe not, or how often they are. Or how
I think a lot of the people who are around the Mises Caucus movement are noticing that as well. I think there's room for improvement, and probably, things will get better eventually. But I also, I would like to go back to something you said a moment ago, David, about the Libertarian Party, the people who have been running it for since the 70s when it was instituted, are trying to legitimize themselves. I mean, that is the wrong game to play in the first place. Like, we do not care about being legitimate to the people who think Joe Biden is a legitimate president. I mean, this guy doesn't even have 2 brain cells to rub together. And I don't care what they think about us. I want to shake the box. And, touching on something you just said a moment ago about reaching out to disaffected liberals and, perhaps disaffected Republicans. I think one of the things that Trump did that made him a successful candidate is he got people to vote who hadn't voted in their entire lifetimes. And that is really, the candidate that wins every election didn't vote, because most people don't vote in the elections. Most people don't like the options, but we can present a real path forward of ending the Fed, ending these endless forever wars, and really upholding the non-aggression principle. That makes sense to a lot of people.
For sure. And actually on that too, I think that, maybe even transitioning into our predictions for the coming year, I think that as a result of what we've seen over the last few years is going to mean that more party politicians leave their parties. I mean, we've seen Kyrsten Sinema and Tulsi Gabbard both leave the Democratic Party to become independents. I don't know that we've seen any on the Republican side. I mean, I guess we saw Justin Amash leave the Republican Party years ago to become a libertarian, the first sitting libertarian in Congress, which is awesome. I think that's my main prediction for 2023, that we're going to see more, disaffection from major parties, perhaps into the libertarian or just independent. What do you guys think?
I'll give it to David there. Pass the football over.
I don't know, guys.
He's a party politician.
That's not that. I mean, so I've worked for the Republicans, for example. I've worked on the inside of this stuff. I've been to DC. I worked on the Hill. I've done all that. So, not to say that I'm like elite in those circles at all. I'm not even close.
You certainly know more than me.
Yeah, but the most people vote against the other party than they vote for their party. Fear motivates most votes, right? So it isn't that Biden is well supported. It's that Donald Trump is more feared.
No doubt about it.
Does that make sense? So the question of the third party is getting to the place where people are so desperate of fearing the other two candidates, or so confused about who's most likely to win, and to throw off that calculus of 30-30-30, that they can get to a majority. And then lastly, money. You take some money. And we're talking the scale of money, guys. It's not close. The operating budget of the RNC is several orders of magnitude larger than the entire presidential campaigns for LP president.
For the last decades.
That's just their yearly annual budget. That's just covering payroll. It's not
way to
even
dash our libertarian hopes and dreams.
Well, no. I just think the likelihood of a libertarian president is very low. And that for the most part, it's an education opportunity, 100%. An education campaign. In fact, I think that's actually what the Mises Caucus was.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very much like an optimist, so I wouldn't rule out anything. But I agree, like, we have to have a very long-term strategy here. It's a multi-generational program. So yeah, you're right about that. But also, we don't have to win the election to influence the election. We could get enough people who are interested in our ideas that the Republicans or the Democrats have to then adopt some of those ideas.
Totally. In fact, the strategic use of libertarian candidates is the best lever the LP has. And that's one thing I have to be very complimentary, and we're based out of Montana. The Montana LP has done an exemplary job of that very phenomena of endorsing candidates that they are not libertarian, right? That's great, because I think in the previous leadership of the LP, they might have said, well, they have the L next to their name. That's good enough. We're just excited to have found someone for that office. And two, specifically praising Republicans who come their way and Democrats who do good things. That the idea in politics, if you are somebody who can never come to the table to be negotiated with, if you're always right and you have nothing else to give on in order to advance your agenda, then no one's ever going to play ball with you. And if no one plays ball with you, you can never advance your agenda beyond the current political power you have. As soon as you're able to negotiate with somebody and say, hey, I won't put a candidate here if you have this policy position, you have now entered into a sphere where you can exercise influence. Until then, you don't have any.
Totally. Well, and I think that's been the biggest sort of issue holding the LP back is that there's this ideological purity test that if you don't check all the boxes of what a real libertarian is, we can't support you. We can't work together. And to me, maybe the Mises Caucus is a step in the other direction on that, where, hey, like if we do agree on foreign policy or we do agree on economic issues, we can actually form these coalitions, support candidates, and actually start to play the game.
So a good example, if the LP of Georgia had said, hey, Herschel Walker, I want you to be 10 times more foreign policy, America first, and we way less interventionist. If you hold to that, you will never have an LP candidate against you. And then executed on that, he would be a senator right now with a huge debt to the LP.
That's true.
That's way more power than the LP currently has. Now, there are a lot of things you can't control in there. Like, for example, our election laws don't allow, if someone registers and puts the number down and puts LP next to their name, then they're a libertarian candidate. As far as Montana, I don't know how Georgia works. Other states have more control with their caucus systems to like say, no, you're not one of us. We have no free association rights in Montana of that nature. So different states have different powers. You have different limitations too. For example, we could never do that with governor, right? The LP can't do that in Montana because they always have to run a governor candidate because that's the way the Montana statute works. They have to have a certain amount of percentage of the governor's race. That said, if the LP was smart, what they'd be doing is going to legislators right now saying, hey, would you like to not have a libertarian in your governor's race next year? Change this piece of code so it says any statewide office. And then they can have that.
Hope you're listening. Well, cool. So I want to, pro tips. Pro tips from David.
We got to talk about Speaker of the House.
I was just going to say, I need to know more about this because I know this is like right in your whole wheelhouse.
Oh,
and it's just been chaos.
Process. Let's talk about process, guys. The sexiest thing in politics. Legislative process.
I think I'm going to go use the bathroom.
So rules. All right, get this. Guess when was the last time the federal government passed a budget, an actual budget, where they said, here's the amount of money we have, here's where we're going to spend, and move that money to? When was the last time that happened?
Was it the 90s?
Pre-Civil War.
Oh, you got
somewhere in between those two.
All right, I shouldn't have asked libertarians there because you're like, never. Well, I'll give you to say the date. I'm spacing on the date right now, but I do remember the anecdote before the invention of the iPad.
Oh, so like 09 or 10.
Yeah, I think it was 2006.
That recent, huh?
Yeah. Oh. Most people are shocked the other direction. So to believe it or not, all the big spending in the 90s is actually done with the budget. But that was what was interesting about it is because you had 28 bills, each with different parts of the government that you were voting for and against. Right. So you actually had debate. You had amendments on the floor. Right. So remember how things become a law, right? You go to first you have an election, you anoint leadership. Leadership picks committees. Committees then introduce bills. You introduce a bill committee and you can amend it in committee, what's usually called executive action. During that process, you vote, bills that pass committee go to floor. At floor, you can also have amendments, right? But they have to pass a majority, and the threshold's usually higher. And it's just you just kind of waste people's time if you do amendments that aren't going anywhere, and you can run into problems with your leadership. Until Paul Ryan, you could do amendments to the floor. Throughout all of congressional history, from 1779 or whatever the first Congress is till then, and we haven't done one since. Why? So that was what was on the table for this speaker election. Can you do amendments? Do you have a budget process? How should Congress run?
Can you explain that? Because there's a gap between we don't do that or we haven't done that since Paul Ryan, and that's what's on the table. Why was it done away with, and why was it back on the table now?
The speaker controlled the process, right?
Nancy Pelosi wouldn't allow amendments on the floor.
No, they didn't get amendments from the floor on this, right? They got way easier things to get. Like the Republicans are going to do immigration control or something like that. Budget control. No, sorry, border control. And they're doing some stuff on the budget, which is good, but they're still not requiring an actual budget from the president, right? How it used to work is that the president would say, here's a budget, And then the House would then pick up that budget, modify it, send it to the Senate. The Senate would modify it. It would go to conference committee, and then it would go to be signed by the president. We haven't done that since 2006. And we should do that, right? And the other side of that, as far as for amendment votes, and it's based in the year, and I'm pretty sure it was Paul Ryan. Basically what happened is you can no longer effectively do amendments from the floor unless there's a majority vote. And what that is pretty much meant is that there's no more amendments from the floor. Where it used to be, any member who wants an amendment can bring it to the floor.
So just for my own edification, because it's obvious I'm still missing something here. Nancy Pelosi wouldn't allow amendments from the floor. Mm-hmm. And so with her stepping out and a Republican majority coming in, they have the right to vote to elect a speaker. Kevin McCarthy was the presumed elected speaker, right? But there was dispute within the Republican Party over whether or not he should be the speaker. Was this amendment issue at the root of whether or not,
yes,
like why certain Republicans did not want Kevin McCarthy to be the speaker?
Yes, the founding of the Freedom Caucus, as much as it was about fiscal restraint and all these other things that the Freedom Caucus was about, it was about process. It was about how do we turn Congress into something that works like Congress again, into a democracy again. Because right now how it works is everything is put into what's called continuing resolutions or omnibuses. Omnibuses are basically cramming everything that you want, every policy that you would pass in a fiscal year in different bills into a singular bill in a giant thing that's all organized by Congress or by leadership, and then rolled out to the floor with 24 hours notice.
Right, and it's like 4,000 pages, and you can't read it. And
that's right. You hear that. That happens. That used to be an exception. Now it's the only thing we pass. We rename bridges and we do omnibuses. That's it, right? And that's how broken Congress is. So and I have criticisms of some of those guys in the sense that it seemed like there wasn't as much consensus as they could have had on exactly what they wanted changed. They said, we want a real budget process and we will vote no until December of 2024, right? In order to get it, then that's what we're going to do, right? Because it's insane that we haven't passed a real budget in that long time. Totally. It's insane that in Congress, a deliberative body, that there's no debates ever. Right? The only time we've had a debate in the last 2 years has been over the speaker, right?
Yeah.
Which in some ways is a good sign.
It's a good sign. That's a return of. Okay, so all right. Oh man. Okay, so the idea that you got people who are all worried about the state of democracy, who are like, why didn't they just pick Kevin McCarthy right off the bat without any debate? That's the same person. Think about that for a second. You have exactly the same person who said, oh man, the democracy's dying because of Donald Trump, but they should just select a speaker from behind closed doors and come out and do a token vote and move along. The same person hold both of those opinions at the same time. It blows my mind.
Welcome to modern politics.
Yeah.
Oh, man. I hate that.
That is wild. Sorry, I mean, it does illustrate how broken the system is and maybe why so many people are also just disaffected from politics in general, let alone a party or another, right? Like, why do people not vote? Well, because they see that this stuff happens all the time, regardless of whichever party is in power, R or D, doesn't seem to make much of a difference, does it?
It's a constant clown world. Like, who wants to participate in that?
What's funny is it's gone from a place where the clown world is all in the media, right? And none of it happens where it should happen, which is on the House floor. Right. What's interesting, so it's great. If you look at all the Speaker McCarthy stuff, you'll see them kind of walking up and talking to each other on the floor. Like there was this long video of Matt Gaetz talking to AOC.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, they talk to each other. Wow. On Twitter's losing its mind about it. It's like, well, of course they do. They're part of the same deliberative body. That should be normal, but we never see that. You know why? Because C-SPAN loses control of the cameras as soon as the speaker's chosen. There is no speaker, so C-SPAN gets to film what they want.
Why does C-SPAN lose control once the speaker's chosen?
That's the House rules.
So we can't see inside of the House
as
the public.
You never see these things. One, because Congress never gets together, except for on State of the Union type stuff. They don't go to the floor all at the same time. They don't debate bills all at the same time very often. I mean, they do go to the floor very often, but you don't see those sorts of things. What you see is a focus on the gavel and things like that, because that allows them the space to sit behind the scenes and talk about stuff in normal civil fashion that actually does happen. That's why that's how Congress works, right? But we never show that, because what they need to fundraise is, this is the most evil party that ever existed. And we have to never let them get a single win. And if we do, we've failed the republic.
And so if they're seen talking to the most evil party that ever existed, well, you talk to evil people?
Exactly. And then it sets an expectation of what democracy should look like. And then if people, and it fails that expectation consistently because people don't see this stuff happen. And then we wonder why there's gridlock in Congress. Well, we've created it.
There it is. We've just solved all the problems of the world, you guys. Here and now.
Did we want to talk about Elon taking over Twitter at all?
Sure.
Yeah.
We can talk about whatever we want, man. We have the mics.
Yeah. Well, I guess
this is Joe Rogan style. We're doing it 3 hours.
I don't know about that.
Are you guys
let's talk about it.
Happy about it, or you think that it's going to make a difference in the long run?
I think it's demonstrative of an idea that it's easy to fall into when you're a free market guy. So in free markets, what we tend to say is that free markets are more efficient, but we don't necessarily say that they necessarily always have the outcome that I would prefer, right? So I might say that free markets are efficient and, but hate Toyotas and then see that Toyotas outsell Ford. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Right? So in general, we don't want to make an argument as free market supporters that says everything will be better and always universally supportable by me if we have freedom, right? But this is a great example of a state of freedom self-equilibrizing, like where things were really corrupt in a bad way that was very obvious to a lot of people. And that created the kind of momentum to allow a person to say, hey, I will get a lot of social credit for solving a social problem with my own dollars. And then going out and doing that and getting a lot of social credit for it. Right? There's a reputational system thing, and that's very much free market. That isn't necessarily what happens, but it's the best alternative to regulation, obviously.
Totally.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily agree, though, that his reputation has improved as a result of owning Twitter. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who probably sold stock in his companies because they disagree with the way he's approached owning Twitter, or perhaps the narrative of what's being told in the mainstream media about what is happening as a result of him owning Twitter. All the racist Nazis coming out of the woodwork to celebrate their freedom or whatever. Him putting Trump back on there, I'm sure was not very pleasing to Democrats. I mean, I think it's a really interesting thing. It's quite a spectacle. I mean, I'm certainly more engaged on Twitter now than I was before because, well, I couldn't really say much on Twitter before without the risk of, probably being put on some FBI list, right? Not that I'm not already on some FBI list. Will be after this thing comes out, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was great to see, the veil lifted a little bit with the Twitter files and get a validation of something I think we probably all suspected was true all along, that there's a lot of collusion behind the scenes and text censorship and all that. And voices being suppressed and stories being covered up and other stories being amplified. I mean, it was the reason I did get off of Twitter for a long time, and I happen to be back on it now with Liberty Portal. And it's been a short while, but it does feel like a little bit more like what I think Twitter used to be originally, which was supposed to be like the free speech wing of the free speech party and all that. So it seems like a net positive. Nothing is all good or all bad any time, but I'd say it seems to be a net positive. It'll be interesting to see if Elon can turn Twitter into a profitable company. I think there's a lot of speculation around that, and it could be. It has been, as like an entrepreneur, a lot of lessons learned, coming in, doing the new CEO move and firing all these people and getting rid of, the dead weight and keeping the people who are willing to work around the clock, and watching the left's reaction to that has been pretty comical as well. But yeah, we'll see how it all plays out.
Yeah. I mean, I find it a much more entertaining place now. I like it qualitatively. I see more things that I want to see. Yeah, I mean, there's so much there. One of the things that I think is especially interesting, returning to one of my first points about the intelligence agencies, is how much the FBI and former CIA and people of that ilk were involved directly or indirectly with either being employed by Twitter or having direct portals into Twitter. In the 1970s, there was a program called Project Mockingbird, which said, specifically in trying to manipulate American media in support of and to minimize opposition to the war in Vietnam. And we know about it now, but at the time, of course, it just looked like CBS just covering the news. We now know that program functionally never ended, that it migrated to the FBI, and that the FBI was functionally doing that at Twitter over COVID and probably maybe over the war in Ukraine. I mean, think about that.
Probably a lot of things.
So like when you say like, does this deserve regulation? It's like, well, how about we regulate the FBI and not allow them to manipulate our media companies?
How about abolish the FBI?
Yeah, right. I mean,
end the FBI.
So one of the things that bothers me is we had so with big tech censorship is that you had a lot of conservatives say, you know what's great? Trust busting, right? Yeah. Teddy Roosevelt, man, that was great. Bring back Teddy. And Trump and other sorts of national conservative types got into that, and I was always like, this is playing with the devil's tools, guys. We should avoid that. We got to throw the one ring into the fire, not use it against Mordor, if you will. And what it turned out was, oh wow, a lot of big tech censorship was actually a function and arm of the government in the first place. We never needed regulations. All we needed to do was stop the executive agencies from infiltrating, multimedia companies and trying to manipulate them.
I mean, it really makes you wonder, like, what's going on behind the scenes at Google and YouTube and Facebook, and I mean,
right?
I mean, to me, it doesn't make me wonder.
It doesn't make. Yeah,
now I know.
Right. It should make the average normie wonder about that. Right. I mean, for guys like us, this was like no surprise. We knew something like this was happening all along.
If someone would have said, and this is the philosopher in me, if someone would have said to me, "Did you know the FBI has a special portal in Twitter where they can monitor and report tweets?" I'd be like, well, that's an extraordinary claim. I would like some extraordinary evidence, please. Right? We now have the evidence, right? So now we know this. Now, do we know this in other companies? No, we do not. That said, if this is not something that's covered under current law, and I was the FBI, of course, that's what I would do. So the same amount of rationality can be applied the other direction and suggest that there's a very likely outcome.
Yeah, it sets a bit of a precedent, right? Like, well, is Twitter that extraordinary of a company that these three-letter agencies wouldn't take a similar interest in all the other ones? Uh-huh. I mean, I think it's safe to assume, but obviously you're right. We need proof. But yeah, it has been fascinating to follow how all that stuff comes out, and also to see the journalists like Matt Taibbi and Barry Weiss and Michael Schellenberger all kind of being panned by mainstream journalists for doing real hard-hitting journalism. Yeah, that's been pretty ironic. I always appreciate that.
You guys remember Biden's Hitler-esque speech?
Yes.
Where he called half of America, terrorists, basically.
That was so terrifying.
That got kind of memory hold.
Didn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, after 4 years of hearing that Trump was Hitler and that he was going to, demonize whatever marginalized group you want to point to, Biden gives a speech like that, and we're supposed to just act like it didn't happen.
Was that the ultra mega? That was the. Or is that just an invention of the media?
Well, ultra mega? That was something that he did say, but I don't know that he said it at this speech. You know the one though, right? Where he appears in front of Independence Hall with the red uplighting,
yes,
and the two Marines in the back, and it's very militaristic and just looks very authoritarian, like straight up something out of Orwell or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
It looked like Big Brother.
From the aesthetics point of view, especially. That's what was amazing about that moment. It was so memeable.
But I mean, even if I
want to know what was going on in that back room with the aesthetics director. Who's like, I have this vision. We're going to do red.
Who was the ad wizard that came up with that?
Have you guys ever seen Empire Strikes Back? We're going for that. Like, that's what we're trying to. Empire Strikes Back. That's
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, but if you pull up like the words of that speech too, it was terrifying.
Yeah.
I mean,
dude, totally.
Yeah, like I don't know if Jamie, can you pull that up? I mean, we should like try and read some of that stuff. We should have like come prepared for that. But
next time
that could be part of the intro. Maybe just a little bit of Biden. Yeah.
Yes. Pull some select quotes, something that like really sets the theme. Yeah. With like the Imperial March playing. Yes. All right. Our friend Griff over here is our Jamie. My fellow Americans. Oh, that's not a little boring. Move on.
We are nothing alike Joe Biden. What are you talking about? We are not fellows. You've been in the Senate.
That's pretty sexist of Joe Biden. You've been a fellow American, right?
You've been in the Senate since Reconstruction. What are we talking about here? We're not the fellows. We're completely different species.
My gender non-specific Americans.
That is strangely misogynistic of him.
Oh yeah.
Wow. Never thought of that.
It's almost like he's old and out of touch.
This is going to be good. Oh boy. I don't even know where to start here. Okay, so he's basically like, okay, so we are all the heirs of the American experiment that began 2 centuries ago. And then in so many sentences later says, Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. So like we're all heirs, but fuck Donald Trump and like half the country. Anyway, we don't need to read this, but
my fellow Americans, except for you guys,
except for half of everyone.
Well, and that's the contradiction of nationalism, right? Nationalism is the idea that if we all had a common identity and came together, we would have a more meaningful civil experience, right? But in practice, what nationalism always does is say, we are the real ones and you guys are the outsiders. And that's why it always turns on itself. It always becomes Maoist of sorts, where it's always like looking for the person that isn't part of the civic life and trying to find and persecute that person or group of people out of existence. Now, the good expressions of nationalism, and especially civic nationalism in America, are relatively benign, right? It's like I generally support the local police when they're getting the person who's breaking windows, puts them in jail, right? The bad, where it really turns bad, because nationalism is a natural part of human nature. It really turns bad is where you get into that place of those kind of articulations of saying like, we are all one thing and we all do everything together. And then eventually that just triggers that common sense of like, well, we're not all one thing and we're all very different. How do we reconcile these things until eventually it goes like, well, we're all one thing except for those guys.
Right. It eventually just narrows the window of acceptable views, right? Down to, well, I mean, to the point where I guess it eats itself, right? In its entirety.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just scrolling through the speech, and he basically rails against MAGA America for like a whole, I don't know, paragraph after paragraph after paragraph.
You know what else we didn't really cover was the retirement of the highest paid bureaucrat in American history.
Who dat? Fauci?
Fauci. He kind of just slipped out the back door, didn't he? I mean, do you think anything's going to come? I guess it won't, because the Senate would be the body to investigate him. But like, I know Rand Paul was chomping at the bit to do that if the Republicans got a majority in the Senate. But
yeah, there was a part of the compromise for speaker had something to do with a church committee. Let me see here. A church-style committee will be convened to look into the weaponization of FBI and other government organizations. Ooh, I think that has more to do with Twitter.
I mean, that seems positive, though.
Yeah. And I think it's positive stuff for the House to do specifically. Ooh, one of the things is number 4 of the commissions, what I forgot to talk about, was bills presented in Congress will be single subject, not omnibus, with all attendee earmarks, and there'll be a 72-hour minimum period to read them, which is a huge win. Okay, that's a great win.
Okay, wait. Let's go back to this, because I think this is actually really key. What are the major concessions that were made to get Kevin McCarthy elected speaker?
Yeah, and this is as reported by Zero Hedge, so grain of salt.
The gray lady.
Completely trustworthy. I totally agree. I love these guys. So they're reintroducing the Jeffersonian Amendment motion, which is basically a motion that any member can make to say, I don't think this person should be speaker anymore. Almost every deliberative body in the world has that. We got rid of it, because Justin Amash used it on Boehner, and then Boehner got rid of it forever after the next time he came in.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I remember that. Church-style committee on the FBI, presumably CIA, and subject of organizational church committee against the American people. That's interesting. Term limits will be put up for a vote, which is totally
what's that last one mean?
Oh, so that's the church-style committee to be convened to look into weaponization of the FBI and other government organizations. And I think that will be everything from Donald Trump, being raided at Mar-a-Lago to hopefully Twitter files and type stuff like that.
Can you explain the context of church style?
So I don't actually remember that.
Because I know like a church commission, that was a congressman, right? Somebody church.
Yes, and it has to do with government corruption. I think it was Hardin or
Jamie. Will you look up the root commission? Of the term church commission?
Yeah. The other one is
just start calling him Griff, though. I mean, we don't want to give Jamie credit for Griff's hard work.
There we go. I like it. So 3 is term limits will be put up for a vote, which is dumb because the Supreme Court said term limits have to be a constitutional amendment anyways.
Okay.
That was 1996 or 4 or 5, somewhere in there.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah. Contract for America, guys.
We're going to learn so much doing this.
Gingrich, Contract for America?
Yeah. So one of his things was congressional term limits, and they built a Republican majority out of it. They passed it Bill Clinton signed it into law, and then the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. You got to have a constitutional amendment to do it.
Wow.
Yeah, which is pretty wild, right? I mean,
that is. I mean, what's the basis for that? Do we know?
I don't remember what the actual judicial interpretation was. I never looked at it.
Look into that.
Okay. For bills presented to Congress to be single subject, not omnibus, which is great, with all attendant earmarks, which is great. Because attendant earmarks, that's where it says we're spending money on, this new program here, right? Or a new bridge or whatever.
So that was a stipulation of the Freedom Caucus.
Yes.
To give the votes to Kevin McCarthy.
Yes.
Okay.
That's why it's so important.
That's awesome.
The Texas border plan will be put before Congress.
What is the Texas border plan?
So it's a typical Republican thing. My brothers, my Republican friends, you cannot solve the immigration problem with just more border enforcement. I'm sorry. It's a militaristic utopian idea that if you just put enough tanks on the border, all of a sudden you're not gonna have illegal immigrants. That's not how it works. But basically, that's what it looks like it is. It's fixed border enforcement policies, enforce laws in the interior, and target cartels and criminal organizations, whatever that means. We should definitely talk about immigration sometime. 6, COVID mandates will be ended, as well as funding for them. So that's great. I'm not exactly sure. I especially know that's true when it comes to House rules. One of the things, if you go to DC right now, you can't actually go visit your member. You got to set up an appointment, and then you have to have a staffer come out and get you and then escort you in. Sorry about that. Is that my fault?
No, that was an airdrop from Griff.
Oh. Yeah, that was in all of our headphones.
That'll be on the recording. We need to get you a mic, dude.
Yeah, that's a lot better way to do it. Just like ding ding ding. We got mail from Griff. It's like Blue's Clues.
It is, dude. That's great. We need to play the Blue's Clues music for this.
COVID, and then lastly, budget bills will stop the endless increases in the debt ceiling and hold the Senate accountable for the same. I'm not sure what that means. So the debt ceiling is a different calculus, right? So the debt, it's like the government issues its own debt limit. It says like, here's our credit card, and our credit card limit's $8,000, right? If you got a city. And then it's like, well, actually, we got American Express Plus now, so it's now $10,000 and it's now $20,000. That's what the debt ceiling is functionally. What's happened is they've pretty much automatically done a debt ceiling increase with continuing resolutions, where what they used to do is 2 separate acts. Because then what was great for that for conservatives is they could bid against it. They could hold the debt ceiling increase so they can get concessions on spending. They kind of gave that up after Paul Ryan and sequestration, all that stuff. So
that's deeper history than I ever thought I would need to know.
Sorry, guys.
But I like it. No, it's good.
Nerd.
I need a nerd button. Okay, so it looks like the Church Commission was convened around Watergate. Oh. In 1973, the Senate Watergate Committee investigation revealed that the executive branch, blah, blah, blah. It looks like, the chairman of the Senate Select Committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence activities was chaired by Frank Church, a Democrat from Idaho. So it looks like it just has origins in the 70s. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yep. Thanks, Griff.
Man, we got good support here.
This is great. Yeah.
We just need a big TV now so we can put up stuff.
Yeah, we do need a big TV. Well, I guess we got that. Probably rope that in. There's going to be a lot of editing for me on this podcast episode, man.
It's going to be great.
I mean, part of me is like, just fuck it. We'll do it live.
Yeah, I think put it out. The more organic, the better.
Yeah, eventually, for sure.
Yeah.
You'll get more traction doing it that way.
Probably will. I mean, eventually I could see us doing a live stream if anybody ever wanted to tune in to listen to 3 dudes blather about politics. And there's actually a lot of really interesting stuff. You are illuminating a lot of really interesting things. And I'm like trying to take notes as they're coming up, because I'm like, we need to do a whole episode on that and a whole episode on that. And yeah.
Can't do it. And I hope I'm getting everything right. I'm doing it off the cuff, off the top of my head, but I think I'm all right.
Well, the one thing you can trust the internet to do is correct you when you're wrong.
Yeah, right.
So
right.
Don't worry about that.
Got to get more careful.
The internet is undefeated. So I hear.
Well, sweet. Are there any other, you guys want to, proffer some interesting predictions for the coming year, or?
Oh man, predictions. I'm not. Okay, so one, Montana legislature is going to have an awesome legislative session. I'm telling you, that's just a work prediction. God, I don't know, guys. It's so hard to predict. I think crypto will have a better year this year. I think we're seeing the bottom of the bear. We'll get some more investment in crypto here soon. That's what I'm both hoping for and predicting.
What do you think about the broader economy?
I think we're stagflation for the foreseeable future. We have to, I mean, the interest rate raises were there, but I don't know if they're substantial enough. Obviously, you're the economist, so you can give me better better diagnosis of where we're at.
I think we're definitely going to be in a recession. Most economists are admitting to this now. I think we had the beginning officially of this recession last year that they were denying. It's most forecasts for 2023 are calling for a mild recession, which means it's going to probably be a severe recession. And I don't foresee it being quick or easy. I think we're seeing the end of a long trend of American dominance. And it doesn't mean that America is not going to ever come back, but for at least a little while, there's going to be a lot of pain here. And I don't know that I would agree on your crypto prediction, but I don't really, markets will determine for themselves. But I think the whole crypto space is something that a lot of libertarians glommed onto as this supposedly free market invention, when I would posit that it was actually more of a symptom of the bubble rather than a cause to the bubble. So if the bubble's popping, then the crypto is going to continue to pop with it, would be my prediction on that. And but predictions are rather meaningless. Everybody can have one. Doesn't mean if I say that it's going to be right. So,
well, I have a prediction.
Yeah.
That this podcast will exist by the end of 2023.
Yes.
Yeah.
Woo.
Yeah.
That we can control, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And if it does, assuming it does, we'll get to follow up and see if your prediction was correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
David?
I just hope I'm right. That's all. Yeah. Now, I think this next year it should be a crazy year when it comes to politics. I think there's going to be a substantial amount of room to grow as a libertarian movement on the education and inflation thing. And I hope that's what people focus on. I hope that we can break the existing. And I guess I'm turning into what should we do in this next year as a movement, which might be a more interesting question for me, something I actually know something about. Is
right. Yeah, that's a better question. Is what can we? Because predictions are rather like a passive sort of thing. It's like, oh, what do you think's going to happen? It's like, what are we going to do?
Right.
What are we going to do to make?
Let's
make
reframe
things
it. Yeah, let's call it resolutions, political resolutions for the new year, right?
For the liberty movement.
Not even necessarily political, but just. Yeah.
I like it for the movement, right? Yeah. Or maybe personally, if you guys want to give those.
Sure.
The focusing on breaking the Ukraine bubble of like articulating the time horizon larger. I think that's priority number one. Priority number two, actually articulate the cause of inflation. It's in its solution. It's very real political solution, and nailing the Fed and the federal budget process to the wall on those things. And man, if we can accomplish those two things in a single year, that would be an incredible feat. And remember that the biggest movements in politics from a libertarian standpoint have often not happened because libertarian actors did them, but rather that we changed the idea landscape. We eliminated the opposition through debate, through open and honest debate, and by equipping people with the best arguments. And hopefully that's what this podcast contributes to, is giving people the best arguments, the best understanding of the news cycle so that they can engage and kind of filter out bottom up in society those ideas.
I completely agree with that, and I think that's maybe a great place to wrap.
Awesome.
Good job, guys. Episode 1 in the books.
Yeah.
Nice.
We'll see if there's a number 2.
Follow Liberty Portal on Twitter at Liberty Portal.
Yes.
Like, subscribe, share.
Like, subscribe, share, and review this podcast on wherever you get your podcast information. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Peace.
Thanks for tuning in to the Liberty Portal podcast. For more episodes, news, and Liberty-focused content, visit libertyportal.com and be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. If you liked what you heard on the show, we appreciate you sharing it with your friends and giving us a review on your podcast platform of choice.